Billionaire Anthony Pratt boasts of the superpower that his money gives him. Billionaire Australian Anthony Pratt is said to have paid former Prime Ministers Paul Keating and Tony Abbott $25,000 and $8,000 respectively for consulting, and then Prince Charles $182,000 in 2021, and lobby group Advance. Australia says Labor's misinformation laws will be its next target after defeating The Voice. Australian billionaire Anthony Pratt paid former Prime Ministers Tony Abbott and Paul Keating for consulting, according to leaked documents, $8,000 a month for the former, $25,000 for the latter. He also paid King Charles, then Prince Charles, $182,000 in 2021, according to the documents that 9 newspapers saw, and boasted on a tape that he was useful to Charles because of Pratt's superpower wealth. In the tapes, he also alleges former U.S. President Donald Trump told him about an U.S. airstrike on Iranian-linked militants in Iraq, claiming Trump said, "I just bombed Iraq today and the president of Iraq called me up and said, 'You just leveled my city.'" The former toddler-in-chief's alleged reaction? "Okay, what are you going to do about it?" Pratt also says he paid about $1 million to Rudy Giuliani, saying Trump's lawyer was someone I hope will be useful one day. The papers note Pratt hung up when they called him about the scandalous tapes and documents. Time equals 400 ms. greater than. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has warned Lebanon of counter-strikes of unimaginable magnitude if militant Muslim group Hezbollah joins the Hamas-Israel conflict, the ABC reports. This comes as the Israeli military said it had hit several Hezbollah targets on Saturday night. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has echoed Netanyahu's words to Lebanon's caretaker Prime Minister Najib Mikati, informing him the Lebanese would suffer. Meanwhile, Palestinian phones received an audio message telling them to move south of Wadi Gaza. If they don't, the message said, they could be identified as an accomplice in a terrorist organization. The Palestinian Health Ministry said Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinians in the West Bank yesterday, bringing the number of deaths there to 91 since October 7. So what next for Advance Australia after it helped tank The Voice to Parliament? It's going after Labor's misinformation laws, dubbing state-held truth as totalitarian and despotic. The lobby group emailed supporters at the weekend about the bill, the Australian Dollar reports. Among the rather chilling lines was director Matthew Sheehan saying that when politicians called something misinformation or disinformation, they are really saying, "You are too stupid to make up your own mind." Speaking of misleading statements, Northern Territory Chief Minister Natasha Fyles misled people about controversial bail changes, the Auditor General found. The NT News, Dollar, says her post saying that the laws would create a new presumption against bail for people charged with a violent offense involving a weapon, was wrong because the changes didn't apply to makeshift weapons such as broken bottles, so her use of weapon was too broad. Fyles then deleted the graphic. Opposition leader Peter Dutton's Facebook post that wrongly claimed Marsha Langton called no voters racist and stupid, however, remains live to this day. Meanwhile, the Australians, Dollar, Jenna Clark and Sophie Ellsworth want you to know opposition spokeswoman on legal matters Michaelia Cash did not straight up forget about former Liberal Ken Wyatt when she said Senator Jacinta Nampijapa Price was the first person with First Nations lived experience informing her party. It was no mistake, the reporters claim. Cash purposely scrubbed him from the conversation because he quit the party over its no stance on The Voice to Parliament. Cash takes 0 prisoners, some random unnamed source told the Oz. Sure, Jan. Our EU trade deal could be a bad deal for every sector in Australian agriculture, putting our farmers at a disadvantage to Canada and New Zealand or South America. That's according to National Farmers Federation President Fiona Simpson, who told the ABC the dud deal could even send our commodities backwards. Their parting words as Simpson steps down. One of the key worries is naming rights on things such as Feta and Prosecco, which the Europeans are much more strict about. Trade Minister Don Farrell is talking to negotiators at Osaka's G7 this month. From farms to parks, and NSW Premier Chris Minns is cutting Sydney's Moore Park golf course in half to create Sydney's very own Central Park, news.com.au reports. Call me jaded, but one would think messing with the playground of the harbour city's rich and influential wouldn't be a masterstroke. Up to 20 hectares will be repurposed, but the 9 holes and club will remain unscathed. Meanwhile, residents at Wheatvale in southeast Queensland were told to brace for possible evacuation yesterday because of a cluster of bushfires, Brisbane Times, reports. Some 6 firefighting aircraft and 20 ground firefighting crews are battling blazes. If you live in the region, check out Queensland Fire and Emergency Services bushfire warnings page. It comes as the government is working on a universal emergency roaming system that'll keep Australians connected during increasingly deadly natural disasters, no matter what their carrier is, the New Daily says. The Australian Competition and Consumer Commission said we need more mobile towers, but that's only going to make a difference if the legislation is tweaked to make building them faster and cheaper. One day in class, Kuwaiti twin brothers Amin and Ayman Almatawa, 7, looked at the increasingly blurry blackboard and then at each other with pint-sized confusion. Was the classroom moving away from them? Shortly afterwards, an eye doctor told the boys the prognosis: Stargardt disease, which means you won't be able to see very well in life. There is no cure. Fast forward 2 decades and the 27-year-old brothers haven't let impaired vision stop them from seeing the world. With dreams of becoming civil engineers, they moved here to study at the University of Queensland and immediately felt at ease. Back in Kuwait, Amin says, their family always urged them to keep their vision issue quiet. They were always hiding us. But in Oz, we chose ourselves. And 2 identical cats, which they named Remy and Tigress. When the bill for the final year of study came through, a cool $100,000, they pressed pause on engineering and started applying for jobs. It was harder than they thought, but for every rejection, Ayman and Amin would say to each other, "That's not the place for us. We don't want to be in a place that sees our vision as a liability because we work hard, we earn our way," Amin tells SBS. But then their landlord contacted them to say their place was going up for sale. They had no choice but to take Remy and Tigress to an animal shelter for temporary housing. Staff were so moved by their positive attitude despite their challenges that they jumped on Facebook. Can anyone help these hard-working, strapping young men with a home or a job? The Post asked Townsville. The community rallied. A recruitment agency found work for Ayman and Amin, and they've got a lead on a unit. Next week, when they get their beloved cats back, they'll finally have the whole family together. Hoping a smile gets you through a tough situation today too. The Voice was doomed from the time the National Party and then the Liberal Party said they would oppose it, and bipartisanship was lost. Mr. Littleproud, Mr. Dutton and the political parties they lead are responsible for this result. An open letter also called Indigenous No campaigners Jacinta Nampijapa Price and Nyungai Warren Mundine, front people, for the No lobby groups, adding, "Only the shameless could say there is no shame in this outcome." More than 100 incubator babies at risk due to Israel's fuel cuts to Gaza. UN, Al Jazeera. Venezuelans vote in opposition primary clouded by uncertainty. Reuters. Iran sentences 2 journalists, who covered Mahsa Amini's death, for collaborating with the US. Euronews. Labor distracted by ideology, deserting aspirational Aussies. Angus Taylor. The Australian dollar. Despite the grim prognosis, these challenges can be overcome with the right agenda. First, avoid waste and unnecessary spending to take pressure off the Reserve Bank, interest rates and inflation. History tells us bouts of high interest rates and inflation are rarely solved by central banks alone. High commodity prices papering over the cracks of a big spending government won't cut it. Labor has spent an extra $188 billion, or more than $7,000 for every Australian, since coming to government. Nor is raising taxes the way forward. Higher taxes on incomes, franking credits and superannuation will only curb the growth necessary for sustainable medium-term budgets. Second, free up workplaces rather than stifling them with new regulation. You couldn't pick a worse time to make industrial relations interventions that undermine the ability for worker and employer to come up with solutions that are good for both. Allowing workers and employers to come up with smart ways to increase incomes for both businesses and employees is a time-honored means of driving productivity and growth. Third, encourage competition and productivity in markets for goods and services rather than falling for the siren call of crony capitalism. I'm a Palestinian citizen of Israel. Right now, that's as complex as you could possibly imagine. Maria Rashed, The Guardian. As an Arab citizen of Israel, I am deeply concerned about the National Security Ministry's relaxation of gun laws for ordinary Israelis after the Hamas attacks, and the threats posed by extremist Jewish groups. Since October 7, 64 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, including a man and his son who were shot dead while attending a funeral. I vividly recall the horrifying scenes in May 2021, when the streets were like a civil war. No innocent civilian should die for their beliefs or opinions. Supporting Palestine does not equate to anti-Semitism. Advocating for ending Israeli aggression against Palestine doesn't imply forgetting the historical experiences and pain of the Jewish people. Today, Zionism's goals come at the cost of Arab lives, leaving us feeling insecure, afraid to voice our opinions and hesitant to empathize with our suffering people. Reflecting on recent events, Israeli citizens have protested against their own government's shift towards dictatorship. Being an Arab in Israel involves understanding the language and history of the other side. This phrasing highlights the oppressor-oppressed dynamic, with one side having one of the most powerful armies in the world and the other being a minority. Therefore, when discussing recent events, we cannot ignore the years of occupation and invasion, and how Israel has treated Arabs. This is not to justify Hamas actions but to provide context for Palestinians' pain and suffering without protection. Eora nation country, also known as Sydney,